Hey guys, tonight we're venturing into one of the coldest, most hostile places on Earth, a place so frigid that every breath feels like it might freeze in your chest. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of an endless white desert where the snow stretches to the horizon and the winds bite with a sharpness you can't even comprehend. You're no longer on the familiar ground of civilization. Instead, you're surrounded by the silence of the Arctic, where the cold seems to be an entity of its own, waiting for you to make a mistake. And trust me, you probably won't survive this. At least not without some very specific tools, a lot of luck, and a whole lot of tea. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love hearing from you all, so let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide these journeys go. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as we dive into the frozen landscape of the Arctic. Let's set the scene. You're standing in the midst of what seems like an unending stretch of snow. There's no shelter from the wind. You're wrapped in layers of clothing that feel like they weigh a ton, your breath turning to frost in the air, and all around you, nothing but snow. You glance over at your fellow explorers. This journey will be so cold and incredibly dangerous, but they're not afraid. Why? Because they've got one vital tool that will help them survive this freezing desert tea. Yes, you heard that right. Tea. It's not just a warm drink to enjoy in a cozy room. In the frozen wilderness, tea was considered an essential survival tool. But what could tea possibly have to offer in such an environment, where the cold threatens to freeze you from the inside out? The answer is deceptively simple: warmth. You see? Tea isn't just about the liquid itself. It's about the warmth it provides to the body, and more importantly, the psychological boost it offers. Historians still argue whether the warmth from tea alone could sustain explorers in such harsh conditions. But what is beyond question is that it became a vital ritual in the daily survival of Arctic explorers. When you're out in the middle of nowhere, struggling against the cold and isolation, the simple act of warming up with a cup of tea is as much about survival for the soul as it is for the body. Imagine now the first sip of tea hitting your lips after hours of trudging through the snow. The warmth spreads from your mouth down to your chest, filling you with a brief but much-needed relief. It's almost like the Arctic can't reach you in that moment. Tea became more than just a drink. It was a lifeline as you huddle together in the cold. You realize that each small act of warmth is a rebellion against the unrelenting environment. The process of boiling water for tea was, in itself, an arduous task. But once it was done, that hot liquid was like a small victory. Tea, it turns out, did more than just provide warmth in such extreme conditions. Keeping warm from the inside out was essential. The cold is so brutal in the Arctic that frostbite can settle in quickly, and hypothermia is always lurking. But there's more to this hold than just the physical dangers. The prolonged exposure to such frigid temperatures messes with your mind. Your thoughts slow, your body aches, and your energy plummets. That's where tea plays its most important role psychologically. There's something deeply comforting about holding a warm mug when everything around you is cold and unforgiving. It reminds you that no matter how bad it gets, you're still human and you're still fighting. In fact, some explorers even made a tradition out of their tea breaks. Every few hours, no matter how dire the conditions were, they'd pause to brew their tea, allowing their frozen fingers to wrap around a warm cup. Historians still argue whether this routine truly helped in the long run, or whether it was more of a mental strategy, a moment to break the monotony and connect with the familiar. Either way, it was a ritual that kept spirits up and, oddly enough, kept explorers going longer than they thought possible. But it wasn't just about the warmth. The tea itself became a symbol of comfort, in a place where comfort was hard to come by. You probably wouldn't think much about tea in the modern world, unless, of course, you're using it as an excuse to pause between work calls or have a relaxing moment in the afternoon. But for these explorers, tea was everything. It wasn't just a drink. It was hope. It was a reminder of life before the ice and wind took over. And it was the fuel for perseverance. Now, take a moment to think about how cold it must have been. When you're facing sub-zero temperatures, your body starts to lose heat rapidly, and the cold creeps in even faster. Your skin goes numb, and your fingers lose their dexterity. You might even think that the cold itself has a personality, an overwhelming force that can rob you of energy and clarity. This was reality for Arctic explorers. Their challenge wasn't just physical frostbite and hypothermia were ever-present threats, but also mental. The cold had a way of seeping into your very soul. Yet, tea was there to provide a sense of rhythm. Even when everything around you seemed chaotic and bleak, historians still debate whether tea's psychological benefits were just as important as its physical warmth. But the fact remains that it became a cornerstone of survival for explorers in the Arctic. It was simple, yet profound. The warm liquid didn't just keep them from freezing. It kept them tethered to the idea that survival wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about holding on to hope and fighting through it with small, familiar comforts. And in a place as alien as the Arctic, where nothing was familiar and nothing seemed stable, that small cup of tea was a reminder of who they were and why they were there. Now, let's talk about the real impact of the Arctic cold on the body. It's one thing to read about freezing temperatures or see the icebergs in movies, but imagine experiencing that cold in its purest form. The body, when exposed to such extreme conditions for extended periods, begins to lose its natural warmth at an alarming rate. Hypothermia, frostbite, and other cold-related illnesses are not just threats in this environment. They're realities that explorers face daily. You trudge through the snow, each step heavier than the last. Your breath comes out in small, visible puffs, quickly evaporating into the frigid air. The wind feels like it cuts right through your clothes, biting at your skin with sharp fingers of ice. You're already cold, but it's not just the cold that you have to worry about. It's how the cold starts to attack you from the inside. The moment your body temperature begins to dip even slightly, your body starts reacting, attempting to conserve energy. Blood flows away from your extremities to keep your vital organs warm, and your hands and feet begin to numb. That's when the cold becomes truly dangerous. Frostbite begins in the extremities, your fingers, toes, and ears. The parts of you least insulated from the cold begin to lose feeling, and the skin starts to change color. First, a pale hue, then blue and purple as blood flow is restricted. It doesn't take long for frostbite to set in, and once it does, it can render you unable to walk or use your limbs properly. In extreme cases, frostbite can even lead to amputation. It's a terrifying reality for explorers in the Arctic. But what they didn't know at the time was that the cold was just the beginning. The real threat was how the body reacted to it. Historians still argue about how best to prevent and treat frostbite. But in the early days of Arctic exploration, the methods were rudimentary at best. At one point, explorers relied on primitive heat sources, such as rubbing the frostbitten areas with snow, or even, disturbingly, using their own urine to warm the skin. It sounds bizarre, but these methods were born out of necessity, not comfort. The explorers were desperate to find any solution to avoid permanent damage. But frostbite wasn't the only danger. The cold also led to an unusual phenomenon, freezing of the body's joints and muscles. As the temperature continued to drop, the muscles would stiffen, making movement excruciatingly difficult. The body's natural reaction to preserve heat, pulling blood away from the extremities, also left explorers feeling tired, sluggish, and increasingly lethargic. They were fighting not just to stay warm, but to keep their own bodies from shutting down. Tea, in this case, was more than just a warm beverage. It was an essential tool for keeping muscles limber and preventing the freezing of joints. With each cup of hot tea, explorers could feel their circulation improve, their bodies come back to life, if only for a moment. At this point, you might wonder how anyone survived the intense cold long enough to make it through such expeditions. It wasn't just about battling the cold in physical terms. It was about managing the mental toll that came with it. The cold could make your body feel as though it were no longer your own. Your mind began to slow, your reflexes dulled, and even basic tasks became monumental challenges. It's no wonder that so many explorers suffered from extreme exhaustion, mental breakdowns, and a loss of hope. The cold made survival a mental challenge as much as a physical one, and that's where the role of rituals, like tea drinking, became essential. The explorers knew that without these small routines, they could lose themselves to the cold Every time they sat down for their tea, it was like grounding themselves, a chance to reconnect with their humanity. It became a reminder that they were still alive, still in control, and still fighting to make it through. For a brief moment, as the warmth of tea spread through their bodies, they could forget about the freezing winds and snowstorms outside, and instead focus on something more familiar, more comforting. It wasn't much, but in the Arctic, even the smallest comforts were monumental. Now, let's step into the psychological challenges faced by these Arctic explorers. It's easy to think that the biggest threat would be the cold itself, but there's another enemy lurking in the endless white snow: the mind. The human body is extraordinary in its ability to endure physical challenges, but the mind can only take so much isolation, so much bleakness, and so much cold. The Arctic was not only a physical challenge, it was a mental one. You're surrounded by snow, day after day, with no sign of warmth or color to distract you. You start to lose track of time. Is it day or night? How many days have passed since you last saw the sun? The landscape offers no answers. The endless white stretches before you, and your footsteps seem to echo back the same sorrow. At some point, you stop looking for landmarks. There's nothing to find. It's just you and the snow, a vast emptiness that seems to stretch on forever. The monotony itself becomes oppressive. It's no wonder that explorers in the Arctic suffered from mental exhaustion, or what we now call snow blindness, a type of sensory overload brought on by the endless expanse of white. Tea, once again, becomes more than a physical sustenance. It's a mental crutch. The ritual of boiling water, the process of brewing, the warmth of the drink itself. It was something familiar in an otherwise unrelenting environment. For a brief moment, it allowed the explorers to hold on to the concept of time. Perhaps it was lunchtime, or perhaps it was just a small break to breathe and think of something other than the freezing winds and aching limbs. The soothing act of drinking tea became something of a psychological reset, a reminder that no matter how isolated they felt, there was still a small corner of humanity they could cling to. But the psychological toll wasn't just from isolation. There was the constant pressure of survival. Each moment in the Arctic was a struggle for life. You could die from the cold, from exhaustion, from hunger, or from injury. The knowledge that each step could be your last was always in the back of the explorers' minds. And if you were lucky enough to survive one day, you had to do it all over again the next day, and the next, with no guarantee that help was on the way. The struggle for survival in such an environment was relentless. Historians still debate whether the explorers' minds were more susceptible to the cold than their bodies were. Some argue that the physical toll was so overwhelming that mental exhaustion became a secondary issue, while others suggest that the isolation and monotony were the true tests of endurance. Either way, the psychological struggle was very real, and in this battle of mind versus body, tea provided a small form of escape. It gave the explorers a way to stop, breathe, and regain some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos of their environment. In fact, many explorers later recounted that one of the most valuable things they did during their Arctic expeditions was to take a mental break. They would stop, make tea, and talk with their fellow explorers. The act of sharing stories, no matter how trivial, became a vital tool for keeping morale up. The human need for connection didn't vanish just because they were in the Arctic, and tea, as simple as it may seem, became an integral part of that connection. It brought the explorers together. It was the one thing they could do that felt normal. So as you settle into this mental landscape, picture yourself surrounded by your fellow explorers. The wind howls outside, but you're inside, huddled close to the warmth of the fire. You sip your tea, and for a moment, you're not thinking about the cold, or the isolation, or the dangerous conditions outside. Instead, you're focusing on the warmth that fills your hands and your chest. You're sharing stories, even if they're just about the weather, or what you'll do once you return home. And for a brief moment, the world seems a little more bearable. Let's take a closer look at how the body reacts to the freezing cold, and how explorers had to learn to fight off its relentless grasp. You've been out here for days, maybe even weeks, and the cold has a way of making its mark. It creeps into your bones, slowly numbing your fingers, your toes, and your face. Even the simplest tasks, like tying your boots or adjusting your gear, become monumental efforts. Every move feels like it requires more energy than it should, as your body's natural reaction to the freezing temperatures is to retreat into itself. Blood flow moves away from your extremities to preserve core body temperature, and soon you can no longer feel your fingers or toes. The thing about cold is that it's sneaky. It starts small, just a little chill in the air, maybe a breeze that feels colder than it should. But then it intensifies. Your body shivers, your muscles tense, and your mind begins to slow down. In the extreme cold of the Arctic, this is where danger begins. It's not the cold itself that kills you. It's what it does to your body when it's left unchecked. Hypothermia creeps in when your core temperature drops, and soon enough, you begin to lose control over your own body. But tea, yes, tea plays a pivotal role in combating these effects. While it may seem like an odd tool for survival, the heat of tea offers something that nothing else can hold. Drinking warm liquids keeps your core temperature up, helping to prevent hypothermia from setting in. It also stimulates your circulation, getting the blood flowing back to your extremities. You can almost feel it as the warmth from the tea reaches your stomach and slowly spreads throughout your body. Your hands tingle as warmth floods back into your fingertips. That moment of feeling warmth return is vital, especially when you're facing temperatures so low that any lapse in your body's defenses could mean disaster. At first, it may seem like a small thing, drinking tea, but in the context of Arctic survival, It becomes a cornerstone of staying alive. The warmth helps your body function more efficiently, giving you the energy to keep going. Your body might not be in the best shape, and your muscles might be stiff from the cold, but the heat of the tea gives you enough energy to take another step, to continue on in the hope that you'll reach your destination. There's also the fact that the psychological toll of freezing temperatures can be even worse than the physical effects. The cold can drain you in ways you can't always see. It makes everything harder. You might start to doubt your own abilities, questioning how much longer you can keep going. And that's when the tea becomes not just a warm liquid, but a symbol of persistence. It reminds you that, despite the overwhelming cold, you are still here. You are still fighting to survive. Historians still debate whether explorers could have survived in the Arctic without the small comforts of warmth, whether it was the tea, the fire, or the small routines they built into their day that allowed them to keep going. Some believe that these rituals were essential to survival, while others suggest that it was a matter of sheer willpower and endurance. But one thing is clear: when you're stuck in the frozen wilderness, clinging to life, even the simplest comforts, like a cup of tea, can make all the difference. As you sit here, warming yourself with that humble drink, you start to understand the true value of small acts of care. Your body may be freezing, but your spirit remains intact. The tea, so simple yet so effective, is your lifeline to staying present, staying alive. And as the snow continues to fall outside, blanketing the world in white, you take another sip and feel, if only for a moment, that warmth is still within reach. Let's now step into the more practical side of survival. How did the explorers navigate through the treacherous whiteout conditions? The vast, icy landscape of the Arctic provides little in the way of landmarks. For days, you can walk and walk, your feet crunching in the snow, only to look around and realize that everything around you looks exactly the same. The horizon is a never-ending blur of white and gray, and the sky seems to fade into the snow, creating an endless loop. It's the kind of isolation that would drive anyone mad. But for these explorers, survival was all about methodical navigation, and their success relied on skills honed over time. Arctic explorers, particularly those who journeyed into the unknown during the early expeditions, had to rely on whatever limited tools and techniques were available to them. They used compasses, sextants, and the position of the sun when they could catch a glimpse of it through the cloudy skies to guide them. But in the middle of a snowstorm, or during an extended whiteout, these tools often proved useless. You couldn't see the sun, and you couldn't trust the compass when the magnetic field of the earth shifted with the icy terrain. So, how did they find their way? Well, they had to rely on subtle clues in the environment, like the direction of the wind or the quality of the snow beneath their boots. Some explorers became so attuned to the feel of the ground underfoot that they could gauge the distance traveled based on the texture of the snow. Their survival was often a delicate balance between knowledge, experience, and luck. They'd move slowly, carefully calculating every step, knowing that taking a wrong turn in the snow could cost them their lives. It was in these moments that the rituals of tea drinking became even more important. While your body is freezing and your senses dulled by the endless whiteness, a cup of tea is a moment to pause, reflect, and gather your thoughts. Without that moment to center yourself, you could easily lose track of time or even make dangerous navigation mistakes. Tea became a necessary mental reset, giving explorers a chance to pause and clear their heads, ensuring that they could continue on their path with purpose and direction. Historians still debate whether tea had any real physical benefit when it came to navigating the Arctic. Some argue that its psychological effects were more important than any warming effects it could offer. After all, the act of sitting down, drinking something hot, and focusing on something other than the cold allowed the mind to reset. This mental clarity, especially in a place where everything around you is either white or gray, was crucial. It kept the explorers grounded and helped them stay alert. On top of all this, the Arctic landscape itself could be disorienting. The absence of any clear direction, no hills, trees, or even shadows to guide you, meant that each step could feel like you were walking in circles. In some cases, explorers even had to contend with the phenomenon of sun blindness, where the reflected light from the snow became so bright that they could barely make out any features on the horizon. And as the days stretched on, this visual confusion made navigating even more difficult. But there was another, more hidden danger that explorers faced in their navigations: the snow. It was easy to think of snow as just, well, snow, but it could act like a trap. Snowdrifts could hide deep crevasses, and thin layers of snow could conceal ice beneath them. One wrong step, and you could break through into the freezing water below, which would spell immediate disaster in the frigid conditions. It wasn't just about finding your way. It was also about avoiding the hazards beneath the surface. In these moments, survival wasn't just about knowing the route or understanding the terrain. It was about being able to make decisions quickly, even when your body was at its limit and your mind was foggy. Tea, in its humble way, gave explorers a few precious moments to think, plan, and recalibrate. It wasn't just a warm drink. It was a tool in their survival kit, helping them to maintain focus and stay calm when their bodies and minds were screaming for relief. Now, imagine yourself deep into the Arctic expedition, perhaps days, even weeks into your journey. By this point, the cold has become a constant companion, and the real battle is no longer against the environment, but against your own body. The chill in the air is one thing, but what really gets to you is the constant toll it takes on your energy reserves. You feel yourself growing weaker every day, not just from the cold, but from the exhaustion of maintaining your willpower. It's not just a physical struggle anymore. It's a mental one. You fight the desire to rest, knowing that every moment of stillness could risk freezing you entirely. The key to surviving in this environment isn't just staying warm, it's conserving your energy. As the cold seeps into your muscles, it's easy to start burning through the fuel your body relies on to keep moving. Every step feels heavier, each breath a bit more labored, and so every action, every movement becomes an exercise in energy conservation. That's where the importance of tea becomes ever more pronounced. You might have limited food and resources, but tea is there, reliable, warming, and a reminder that even in the worst conditions, you have something that helps you hold on to your humanity. The warmth of tea, while seemingly simple, does far more than just warm your hands. It boosts your metabolism, helping your body continue functioning at a minimum level of efficiency. The hot liquid serves as a jolt to your system, sparking your body's internal fire, and for a brief moment, you feel your limbs come back to life. It's a temporary fix, but in the Arctic, those small fixes are what keep you going. Historians still debate whether the benefits of tea were purely physical, or if they were psychological as well. Some suggest that the tea itself provided some measure of caloric benefit in the cold. Others believe that the act of drinking it, of taking a moment to slow down, was just as important as the tea's actual properties. The ritual itself might have been just as vital as the warmth it provided. When you're isolated, when you're alone in the snow, even a moment of peace and a connection to the familiar can keep your mind from spiraling. But it wasn't just about the mental break. The cold in the Arctic could literally freeze your body's core temperature at an alarming rate. And maintaining warmth wasn't just about comfort. It was about survival. Tea kept the body from giving in to the numbing forces of the ice, preventing you from losing too much body heat too quickly. It also helped slow the onset of frostbite. You may have never considered the role that something as simple as a warm beverage could play in preventing the loss of fingers, toes, or even limbs. But when you're out in the Arctic, battling the cold, every single moment, every advantage counts. As your body becomes more fatigued, you start to notice changes, small shifts in your perception. Your skin feels tighter, your hands stiffen, and your steps become slower. You know that you're walking the line between survival and collapse. Each sip of tea is like a tiny tether to life. It's a signal to your body that it's okay to keep going, as long as you can keep your body from completely shutting down. You have a fighting chance, but no one can stay in the Arctic forever, and no one is invincible. Every expedition eventually has to turn back. The explorers who survived the Arctic did so because they knew when to stop, when to retreat, and when to recognize that the cold was winning. But for those who continued on, tea was there as their companion. It wasn't a cure for the brutal conditions, but it was a reminder that, in even the most trying of times, survival is a series of small, consistent actions, like drinking a cup of tea, that add up to something greater as you continue your journey through this frozen wilderness, you begin to grasp how survival in the Arctic is less about heroism and more about endurance. It's not about racing across the snow or pushing yourself to your limits. Instead, it's about learning to manage your own body, to keep it functioning at the bare minimum. It's about maintaining a steady, almost monotonous pace, with every step calculated, every action minimized to conserve energy. The explorers who survived knew that if they rushed, if they let their anxiety or desperation drive them, they wouldn't make it. So, they adopted a slow and steady routine, focusing on the basics. The key to their success was the ability to recognize that survival wasn't about speed. It was about persistence, patience, and knowing how to pace yourself. Each movement was a deliberate choice. As you trudge through the snow, you focus on keeping your body warm. You stop every now and then to check on your fellow explorers, making sure no one's succumbing to the cold or frostbite. Tea becomes a sacred part of this routine. Every sip offers not just warmth, but reassurance. It's as if, for a moment, you're reminded that you're still alive, still fighting against the cold, still holding onto a sliver of hope. But beyond the warmth of tea, there's another crucial aspect to surviving the Arctic: food. And by food, I mean whatever scraps you can scavenge or carry with you. In the harshest parts of the Arctic, the struggle for food is almost as perilous as the battle against the cold. For days at a time, explorers would often go without real sustenance, relying on small rations, biscuits, dried meat, and sometimes, if they were lucky, whatever they could hunt or forage. In many cases, explorers had to stretch their supplies as far as possible, making do with what they had, even if that meant going hungry. This scarcity of food presented another challenge: how to stay motivated when your body is screaming for sustenance. This is where the psychological toll really began to wear on explorers. There's only so much hunger a person can endure before it starts to feel overwhelming. In these situations, tea again provided that mental buffer. Even though it wasn't a meal, it became a way to keep the mind distracted from hunger. The ritual of tea drinking, paired with the warmth, provided the explorers with a brief respite from the physical discomforts of their journey. It's the small things, like a warm drink, that become anchors when everything around you feels as though it's slipping away. Despite the cold, despite the hunger, and despite the isolation, you know that there's always that moment you can look forward to. That moment when the kettle is on and you can hold that warm cup in your hands. For those explorers, that cup of tea wasn't just a source of warmth. It was a moment of humanity amidst the barren, frozen landscape. Historians still argue whether the physical toll of hunger was more dangerous than the psychological effects of isolation. Some say that the mental struggle was the real challenge, while others argue that it was the physical exhaustion, combined with the relentless cold, that took the greatest toll. What's clear is that in such an environment, maintaining a sense of routine and calm was critical. And for many, the tea ritual was the one thing they could control in a world that seemed entirely uncontrollable. Now, as you think about the Arctic expeditions, imagine how each day was a new battle, fought not with weapons, but with willpower. Every step forward was hard-earned. You weren't running toward a goal. You were simply making sure you didn't lose ground. You weren't racing the clock. You were doing everything you could to survive the next moment, the next hour, the next day. And in these quiet moments, when you sip your tea, you can almost forget about the vast emptiness around you. You can hold on to something familiar, something that feels like home. The true lesson of these Arctic journeys is that survival isn't about one grand action. It's about the accumulation of small, consistent choices. Drinking tea, setting up camp, moving at a steady pace, taking care of yourself and your fellow explorers. In the face of such overwhelming odds, these small acts of survival are what kept explorers alive. It wasn't the bravest or the strongest who always made it. It was those who understood that survival wasn't a sprint. It was a marathon. As you continue along this perilous journey, there's another vital element to surviving the Arctic: your shelter. The constant barrage of icy winds, combined with the unrelenting cold, makes any form of protection crucial. At first, shelter might seem like an afterthought, a simple tent or a temporary refuge. But in the Arctic, it becomes your lifeline. The days can feel like they stretch on forever, and the nights are even worse when the temperatures plummet and everything around you feels like it's turning to ice. You and your fellow explorers settle in for the night, your breath visible in the air as you huddle close together, trying to conserve what little warmth you've managed to retain during the day. You've spent hours navigating through blinding snow, trudging across endless white plains, and now, after a grueling day, you have to rest. The shelter, perhaps a small tent, or even an igloo, becomes a crucial barrier between you and the deathly chill that waits just outside. The challenge, of course, is that even the best shelter can only do so much. If the wind is strong enough, it can freeze the edges of your tent and make the interior feel like a fridge. You do what you can to insulate your shelter with whatever materials. You have extra clothes, blankets, and sometimes even snow itself. There's a strange irony here. The very thing that's trying to kill you, snow, is also your protector. Snow, when packed tightly, can create a surprisingly effective barrier against the cold. The more layers you can add to your shelter, the more likely you are to survive the freezing night. But even inside this shelter, survival is a delicate balance. You can't let the warmth from your bodies slip away too easily, and you can't let your clothing get wet. Wetness in the Arctic is a killer. Snow, ice, and even the moisture from your own breath can dampen your clothing, which can quickly lead to hypothermia. So, keeping your clothes dry is paramount, and that's where the act of warming yourself up with tea comes in again. You sip your tea slowly, feeling the warmth spread inside your body. It feels like a shield against the night, a small but crucial defense in the face of such overwhelming cold. Tea, with its simple but effective heat, becomes a part of your survival strategy. And it's not just physical warmth that it provides. It offers comfort, too, in this dark, cold, and isolated place. A cup of tea is a small, simple pleasure. It's something that connects you to life back home, to the moments of warmth and companionship you used to take for granted. You close your eyes, allowing the warmth to seep into your bones, grateful for this small luxury. Yet, even as you rest, you know that sleep is not something you can take for granted. The cold is never far away, and you must remain vigilant. In many Arctic expeditions, the danger of falling asleep in such extreme conditions was a serious threat. Explorers had to find a delicate balance between rest and survival. Too much sleep could mean losing precious warmth, while not enough sleep could lead to exhaustion and mental breakdowns. Tea, once again, played a role in this balance. It gave explorers the energy they needed to stay awake, stay alert, and keep the fire of life burning just a little longer. Historians often debate whether sleep deprivation or the constant cold was the most dangerous part of the Arctic journey. Some suggest that lack of sleep eroded the explorers' mental focus, while others argue that it was the brutal physical toll of the cold that posed the greatest risk. What is certain, though, is that managing your body's response to both was essential for survival, and tea, in all its simple warmth, helped mitigate some of the effects. By offering a moment of comfort and hydration, it allowed explorers to push forward through their exhaustion and maintain the alertness needed to stay alive. Surviving the Arctic, then, becomes a dance of resilience. You constantly check your body, gauge how much energy you have left, and adjust your strategy accordingly. But it isn't just about surviving the elements. It's about surviving the isolation, the mental challenges, and the overwhelming realization that you're surrounded by an environment that has no mercy. In these moments, when everything feels impossible, tea is your anchor, your constant reminder that you're still human, still alive, and still in the fight. As you continue, there's something fascinating about how survival in the Arctic becomes not just a test of physical endurance, but a test of patience. The Arctic environment strips away the luxuries and conveniences that we take for granted in our daily lives. There's no rushing forward, no quick fixes in the Arctic. Every action takes time, whether it's setting up camp, preparing food, or simply staying warm. The relentless nature of the cold forces you into a slow rhythm of survival, and every small victory, like a cup of tea or a successful meal, becomes something to hold on to. Each day in the Arctic brings a new challenge, but perhaps the greatest one is simply staying occupied. The snow stretches out in every direction. The cold wraps itself around you, and time begins to lose its meaning. As an explorer, you're not just fighting the cold, you're fighting monotony, the same white landscape, the same empty horizon, the same howling wind, and so you learn to find meaning in the small things. Tea becomes an anchor, not just for your body, but for your spirit. It's a simple act, yes, but it gives you a rhythm in an environment where nothing else feels predictable. This might seem strange. Why would something as simple as tea have such significance in a place so brutal? But that's exactly what makes it so important. In the Arctic, where the landscape itself seems indifferent to your survival, these small comforts become monumental. It's as if, by drinking tea, you're affirming your ability to maintain a sense of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic world. You may be far from home, far from the comforts of a warm bed or a hot meal, but the tea gives you a moment to reclaim something familiar. At night, when the cold really sets in and the wind cuts through your shelter, the act of sitting down for tea becomes more than just a physical necessity. It's a reminder that you're still moving forward, that you're still fighting. And when you're isolated in an environment as harsh as this, every little ritual counts. Tea is your reminder that even though you're surrounded by an endless white void, you're still a part of something bigger. The warmth, the shared cups with your fellow explorers, all of it creates a sense of community, even in the most isolated place on Earth. Of course, as the days stretch on and exhaustion sets in, tea becomes even more essential. Your body is working harder than ever to maintain warmth, and every sip gives you a slight boost. But the need for warmth is only half of the equation. The other challenge is food, and in the Arctic, food is a luxury that's often hard to come by. Every explorer had to deal with the scarcity of supplies, rationing what they had, and often going without meals for days. When food is this limited, tea, once again, becomes more than just warmth. It's a source of hydration and nourishment. While not a meal, it provides some calories and fluids, which are crucial for survival. Every drop counts. Every little bit of tea, as simple as it seems, helps you stay functional. Just a little longer. Historians still debate whether tea itself had any lasting physical benefits for explorers, but what's certain is that it was a critical part of their daily life. It helped them survive physically, but it also helped them survive mentally. Tea offered a moment of rest in a day that never seemed to end, and in a place where nothing ever changed. As you sit with your fellow explorers, you understand that tea is more than just a drink. It's a survival tool, a routine, and perhaps most importantly, a source of hope in the midst of the Arctic's endless cold and isolation. Tea reminds you that even in the harshest of conditions, survival is about finding small comforts, creating moments of warmth, and keeping the human spirit alive. As you sip your tea, you can feel the warmth returning to your fingertips, to your toes, to your mind, and for just a moment, the snowstorm outside becomes a distant memory. You're still here, still holding on. The cold might never fully leave, but with each cup of tea, you inch a little closer to the end of the journey. The endless white is still there, but you've got something to hold on to, a small, warm cup of tea in your hands, a reminder that survival isn't just about enduring the cold. It's about continuing to live, to fight, and to find warmth in the most unlikely of places. Now, as we dive deeper into the daily struggles of these explorers, let's look at something that might seem trivial, but is, in fact, an essential part of survival in such extreme conditions. Sleep. Imagine you've been pushing through the harsh cold, navigating icy terrain, trying to stay warm, and rationing your food. The cold bites at your face. The wind howls around you, and your body is screaming for rest. You've been awake for hours, but you know you can't sleep yet, not without making sure everything is properly prepared for the night. You settle down inside your shelter, the small tent you've managed to set up against the endless snow. Even here, in your small, insulated haven, the cold is constant, trying to worm its way in through every crack and crevice. Your breath forms little clouds in the air, and the warmth you've managed to build with tea begins to dissipate the moment you stop moving. Your muscles are sore from the day's trek, your limbs stiff and tired. Sleep is tempting, but in the Arctic, sleep is dangerous. Why, you might wonder, is sleep so dangerous in such an environment? The answer lies in the body's natural response to extreme cold. As soon as you start to relax, your body begins to cool down. In sub-zero temperatures, it's not hard to imagine that once you fall asleep, your body's core temperature could drop too much, too quickly. This is where many explorers met their end, not from the cold while awake, but from the body's inability to stay warm during sleep. There's no luxury of blankets or heat pads to help you maintain warmth. You have to rely on your own body and the warmth you've managed to preserve during the day. But tea, once again, provides an unexpected solution. The warmth it offers is not just a momentary relief, but a way to prepare your body for the long, cold night ahead. As you sip the tea, you feel the heat flow through you. It's not just physical warmth. It's the calming ritual that allows your body to slowly adjust. The act of drinking something warm can trick your body into thinking it's safe to rest, even in a place as hostile as the Arctic. Tea isn't a cure for the dangers of the cold, but it is a way to ease the transition from the high-energy, high-alert state of daytime survival to the more vulnerable, restful state of sleep. But even as you settle in for the night, there's a nagging worry in the back of your mind. Will the cold seep in through the shelter? Will you wake up in the middle of the night, frozen stiff and unable to move? This is a very real fear for any Arctic explorer. Sleep, while necessary, is fraught with the danger of losing body heat. And there's always the fear of not waking up when you need to. That's why the explorers would often take turns keeping watch through the night. You couldn't afford to all fall asleep at once. Someone had to be alert, ensuring that the shelter was secure and that the cold wasn't creeping in. But that, too, was a double-edged sword. The constant vigilance led to exhaustion, and sometimes the more you tried to fight sleep, the more your body craved it. In these moments, a cup of tea could do more than just warm you up. It could keep you from falling into a dangerous sleep too soon, allowing your body to continue its fight against the cold. And what about the cold itself? What happens to your body when it's exposed to the Arctic cold for so long? Hypothermia becomes a constant concern. It doesn't always look like you'd expect often. It starts with just a subtle shift in your thinking. Your body's temperature drops slightly, and you start to feel sluggish, disoriented, even sleepy. This is where things get dangerous. As the body loses heat, the brain starts to slow down. Your mind becomes foggy. Your thoughts become sluggish. And eventually, you're at risk of losing the ability to move at all. It's a silent killer, creeping in unnoticed, and often when you least expect it. That's why the act of warming up with tea before sleep becomes so crucial. It's not just about keeping the cold at bay for a few hours. It's about making sure your body stays in a state where it can function properly. Tea doesn't just provide warmth. It reminds your body to stay awake and alert, to fight off the effects of hypothermia before they set in. It's an essential part of survival, a ritual that helps you stay focused, even as your body begins to tire. Historians still debate the best ways to deal with the brutal sleep conditions of the Arctic. Some believe that the sleep deprivation itself could be as dangerous as the cold, while others argue that the cold was the true enemy, and lack of sleep merely compounded the risks. Regardless, it's clear that the Arctic expedition was never about any one aspect of survival. It was a delicate balance of warmth, food, rest, and mental fortitude. Tea became one of the many small lifelines that kept explorers going, providing just enough of each to give them the strength they needed to survive the night. Let's move on now to one of the lesser discussed aspects of Arctic survival, the role of animals. Many explorers in the early days of Arctic expeditions didn't travel alone. In fact, one of the most important survival tactics involved companions that didn't speak, but helped in ways unimaginable. Dogs. Sled dogs were the silent heroes of Arctic exploration, providing transportation, companionship, and even protection in the harshest of environments. Picture yourself bundled up in layers of clothing, trudging through a snowstorm, the wind howling around you. Behind you, a team of dogs pulls your sled, their paws crunching through the snow, and their breath visible in the freezing air. You can hear their faint barking in the distance, a reminder that you are not entirely alone. Their loyalty and strength are not only a comfort, but a critical resource. Without them, your survival would be much more difficult. These dogs weren't just pets. They were life-saving partners in the unforgiving cold. Dogs were able to pull sleds over long distances, allowing explorers to cover vast stretches of ice and snow, something that would have been impossible with only human strength. The sled dogs also helped carry extra supplies, providing the explorers with the means to transport food, tents, and other essential equipment. The explorers depended on these dogs not just for labor, but for their keen senses. 2. In the Arctic, where every sound can be amplified by the silence of the snow, the dogs acted as an early warning system for potential dangers, such as wildlife or changes in weather. They were the explorers' ears and eyes, and often their only connection to the world beyond the horizon. However, even with these loyal companions, survival was still an uphill battle. The dogs, while indispensable, were also vulnerable to the same dangers of the cold. The explorers had to care for them just as much as they cared for themselves, feeding them, keeping them warm, and ensuring they had the strength to keep pulling the sleds was essential. In many cases, dogs were given tea or warm water to help prevent hypothermia, and sometimes explorers would even cuddle with the animals in an attempt to share warmth. This may sound odd, but in a place where everything is life-threatening, every little act of survival counts. Historians still debate the full extent of how early explorers treated their animals, with some suggesting that the dogs were sometimes overworked or mistreated due to the pressure of the journey. Others argue that explorers treated their animals with great care, understanding that their survival was tied to the well-being of the dogs. Regardless, the bond between humans and dogs during these expeditions was critical. In many cases, the dogs were the difference between life and death. It wasn't just the dogs, though. Horses, reindeer, and even the occasional Arctic fox played roles in early survival efforts. Some expeditions used reindeer for their meat and hides, while others relied on horses for transportation across frozen tundras. These animals, along with the dogs, were the first line of defense against the vast, barren wilderness. Without them, the human element of the expeditions would have been much weaker, and the survival rates would have been far lower. But the animals weren't the only companions explorers had. The mental toll of being isolated in such a harsh environment was enough to break anyone, and that's where the psychological support from fellow explorers came in. You could share stories of home, talk about the world outside, or just sit in silence together. These small acts of connection, while simple, were vital to keeping morale high. Without that support, without the solidarity of your companions, you might have lost the will to continue. That's why, alongside the dogs and other animals, tea became more than just a drink. It became a form of companionship. The simple act of sharing a warm cup with a fellow explorer, perhaps even one of the dogs who had been given a sip of tea, was a moment of shared humanity. Tea was a bridge, connecting you not only to your own body, but to the world around you. It was warmth in a place where warmth was scarce, and it was a reminder that, despite the isolation and the frigid cold, you were still alive. In these moments, when the wind howled outside and the snow piled high, you could almost forget about the constant threat of death and simply enjoy the companionship of your fellow explorers and their animal partners. And when you finished your tea, when you wiped the warmth from your lips, you could press on for just a little longer. The dogs would be by your side, the sleds still moving forward, and the ice would still stretch out before you. But in that brief moment of warmth, you had everything you needed to carry on. Now that you've settled into the rhythm of survival in the Arctic, let's consider the true tests of endurance. The days that seemed to stretch on forever. The cold is a constant, yes, but there's something even more relentless than the frost itself, the extreme isolation. Imagine being far from civilization, with nothing but the horizon of ice and snow ahead of you. The landscape offers no comforting sounds, no signs of life. All you have is the cold and the unbroken silence. And for explorers, this can be an immense psychological challenge. The human mind isn't built for such isolation. As you trek through the snow, the days begin to blur together. The light of the sun becomes irrelevant, swallowed up by the heavy snowstorms that often blocked visibility for days at a time. You don't know if it's day or night anymore. Time seems to collapse into an endless stretch of white. You've lost track of the number of days you've been out here. All you know is that the cold continues to press against you, and the promise of warmth, whether from a fire, your fellow explorers, or that ever-present cup of tea, seems like an unreachable goal. The mental toll of isolation is profound. Even if your physical health is holding up, if your fingers aren't frozen, if your legs haven't given out, you start to feel the strain of being alone in a place that seems to go on forever. Your mind begins to play tricks on you. You imagine seeing things in the snow, shadows that aren't there, sounds that seem to echo off the ice when there's no one around. The longer you stay out here, the more your sense of reality begins to fray. It's in these moments of mental fatigue that the small comforts become all the more crucial. Tea, once again, offers not just physical warmth, but a much-needed mental break. The act of sitting down with a cup of warm tea, the steam rising into the frigid air, offers a brief escape from the monotony. For a few minutes, the cold outside doesn't seem so oppressive. You and your fellow explorers exchange quiet words, perhaps a joke to lift spirits, and the warmth of the tea gives you just enough of a respite to continue on. You begin to realize that survival in the Arctic isn't just about how strong you are physically. It's about how well you can maintain your will to go on in the face of such extreme isolation. The harshness of this environment means that you have to learn to ration, not just your food and supplies, but your energy and your sanity. There's no room for the luxury of boredom or self-pity. You can't afford to let the overwhelming sight and isolation consume you. And this is where the importance of the little rituals like tea breaks becomes clear. They're not just about surviving. They're about keeping a sense of humanity alive in the midst of a landscape that seems to strip it away. The simple act of pausing for tea, of taking a moment to connect with the people around you, becomes a mental lifeline. It might sound trivial, a cup of tea, But when you're far from home, when you're cut off from everything familiar, these small moments of warmth and human connection become monumental. Tea doesn't just warm your body. It reminds you that you're not truly alone. You may be far from the world you once knew, but in that small shelter, with your fellow explorers, with your loyal dogs, you're still a part of something. You're still alive, still fighting against the cold, and that's enough to keep you going a little longer. Historians have long debated the psychological impact of the Arctic environment. Some argue that it was the mental toll of isolation, more than the physical dangers, that led to many explorers' demise. Others believe that the cold was the most significant threat, with mental exhaustion being a byproduct of the harsh conditions. What is certain, however, is that the mind plays a huge role in survival, and the ability to maintain mental clarity in such a hostile environment is a skill in itself. Tea, for all its simplicity, plays a role in that. It gives you that break, that mental reset, to keep moving forward. It helps you focus on the next step, the next breath, the next moment of warmth as the days stretch on and you continue battling the unyielding cold. You start to notice the subtle dangers that creep in, the ones that don't immediately announce themselves, but have the potential to sabotage your journey. These are the threats that come from within your own body, not the freezing winds or the biting snow. These are the injuries and the illnesses that, in such a harsh environment, could end your expedition before you even realize what's happening. Let's focus on one of the most insidious dangers: frostbite. We've already touched on how frostbite can cause the freezing of your extremities, like your fingers, toes, and nose. But there's more to it than just the numbness. The real danger lies in how quickly frostbite can progress. At first, your skin might tingle or turn pale, and the cold starts to feel unbearable. But before long, the tissues begin to freeze, and your skin turns from pale to blue, and eventually to black if left untreated. Frostbite can lead to permanent damage, causing limbs to become gangrenous and necessitating amputation. The cold is always on the hunt, and it doesn't give you much time to react. Frostbite doesn't wait for you to notice. It happens swiftly, insidiously. You're caught up in the task of survival, focused on keeping yourself moving, staying warm, sipping your tea when you can, and trying to make progress toward your goal. And then, one day, you notice that your fingers aren't moving quite as they should. Maybe they've become stiff, or your toes feel like they're made of linen. The first signs of frostbite are often so subtle that it can be easy to ignore them. But by the time you realize what's happening, it's often too late. The cold has already begun to take hold. This is when tea, in its humble form, becomes even more vital. Tea isn't going to cure frostbite, but it does play a crucial role in slowing its onset. The warmth from the tea can help stimulate blood flow to your extremities, encouraging circulation and providing a temporary defense against the creeping chill. The heat gives your body a much-needed boost, allowing it to fight the cold just a little longer. Every small sip of tea is like a tiny battle one against the frost, keeping your limbs alive and functioning in the midst of the cold. It's not just about surviving the physical toll. It's about actively fighting back against the damage that the cold does to your body. But frostbite isn't the only threat. The extreme cold can also lead to hypothermia, a condition where your body's core temperature drops to dangerously low levels. Unlike frostbite, which only affects specific areas of the body, hypothermia affects your entire system, causing confusion, fatigue, and, in the worst cases, unconsciousness. The real danger with hypothermia is that it can sneak up on you. You may not feel cold at first, as the body begins to shut down in an attempt to conserve energy. By the time you realize that your body is no longer responding the way it should, it's too late. Hypothermia doesn't give you much of a warning. It simply takes over, 1 degree at a time. In the Arctic, where temperatures can drop to 40 degrees Fahrenheit and colder, hypothermia is always a threat. The constant battle against the cold means that your body is always on the edge of exhaustion, and any moment of neglect can be enough to push it over the edge. The warmth provided by tea is again, a small but important shield against this threat. It's not going to cure hypothermia, but it can slow its progress, giving your body the time it needs to stabilize. What's fascinating about these dangers is how the explorers managed them. Every action had to be deliberate. Every decision had to be made with the knowledge that your body was not a reliable machine in the Arctic. It was fragile, susceptible to every change in temperature and every gust of wind. Survival wasn't about how strong you were. It was about how well you knew your own body and its limits. It was about recognizing the first signs of frostbite, feeling the first tinges of hypothermia, and taking action before it was too late. In this environment, nothing is easy. Every moment, every sip of tea, every decision you make could mean the difference between life and death. The cold, while brutal, isn't your only enemy. It's the quiet, creeping forces of your body, slowly giving up under the pressure. But in the quiet, meditative act of sipping tea, you regain control. You take the time to listen to your body, to recalibrate, and to keep moving forward. And as you do, you realize that survival in the Arctic isn't about battling the cold directly. It's about managing all the little things, the small comforts, the rituals, the knowledge of when to act that help you fight through each day. As we reach the final leg of this Arctic journey, you begin to reflect on the incredible resilience required to make it through these treacherous conditions. The cold is relentless, the isolation suffocating, and yet here you are, still standing, or perhaps more accurately, still moving forward, because surviving the Arctic isn't about reaching a destination. It's about surviving the relentless present. The struggle isn't just about the landscape, the cold, or the physical exhaustion. It's about maintaining the will to keep going, despite everything that tells you to stop. Through the thick of the journey, you've relied on the essentials: food, shelter, and warmth. But it's not just the big things that have kept you going. It's the tiny moments of care, of self-preservation, that make all the difference. The act of drinking tea, something so simple, in the comfort of everyday life, becomes a vital lifeline. It's a pause, a tiny piece of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic, life-threatening world. Every cup of tea provides a break from the ceaseless cold. It warms your hands, your chest, and most importantly, your soul. The long, cold nights still loom ahead, but there's something else too. The steady resolve of knowing that every tiny victory builds upon the last. That's what it takes to survive here. You can't think of the journey as one long, insurmountable mountain. You break it down into the smallest pieces, each step forward. Each sip of tea, each flicker of warmth is a victory. And then there's the incredible role that the human spirit plays in all of this. You start to understand that survival is about more than just your physical strength. The mental strength, the refusal to give up, even when your body is screaming to stop, becomes just as important. There are moments in the Arctic, as the cold takes over, when all you want to do is curl up and stop moving. The weight of the cold, the isolation, the constant danger. It all feels like it's too much, but somehow you push on. You learn that survival in such an environment isn't linear. Some days will be better than others, and that's okay. Some days you'll make progress, and other days you'll struggle just to keep moving. The trick is to find comfort in the small moments, to remind yourself that every day you survive is a victory. A cup of tea, a few more miles, a night without frostbite. These small moments are what you live for, what you fight for. In an environment that seems so unforgiving, it's the little things that become life's greatest treasures. The truth is, the Arctic is not just a test of endurance. It's a test of perspective. It's about adjusting to the situation, finding the moments of respite, and holding on to the knowledge that, despite everything, you're still in the fight. The tea you drink, the food you ration, the shelter you build, these are all pieces of a puzzle, pieces that, when put together, allow you to keep moving forward. So, as you sit by the fire, the warmth from your last cup of tea slowly fading, but still lingering in your body, you realize that this journey, as grueling and isolating as it has also been a lesson in what it truly means to survive. Survival isn't about conquering the elements. It's about making the most of what you have every day. It's about persistence, not perfection. As you slowly begin to drift off to sleep, you know that tomorrow will bring more challenges. But with each day that passes, you're one step closer to the end of this journey. The cold will still be